Okay, well, I'll do just a quick introduction. I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit more, Delmar, but I just want to share how I met you and why I'm excited for this. So, appreciate everybody joining us today. And again, thanks for the patience while we figured out Zoom. I also had a flight that just got canceled twice, and I was trying to figure out, and then I turned around and the Zoom wasn't working. So thank you all for that. But I met Delmar 2 years ago. We do a course at Piscinus Ranch that's about 2 hours south of San Francisco. And we visited Delmar and his partner Carin's farm, which is a biodynamic farm in that area. And I have always been really interested in biodynamics. We also do a course in the Hudson Valley with a place called Hawthorne Valley Farm. That's a pretty incredible place. Um, but I haven't fully understood it. And there's a lot of debate around the validity of some of it or how grounded in science it is. But the practices that I have seen have always led me to believe that it's one of the best farming models that we can follow. And Delmar, I felt like addressed biodynamics, what I knew about it, and also what I didn't understand about it in the most easy to comprehend way, including those parts of it that I thought were sort of not grounded in science or that was the conversation around it. And so I just really appreciated that. And I've been very eager to have him back to share that with more people. And I thought it would also be great to do it ahead of our course in the Hudson Valley, which is starting again next week. So, Delmar, I'll let you talk a little bit more about your background and experience, but I just wanted to share that piece with everyone.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, no, I'm sorry that technology sometimes throws us little curveballs, but glad we're at least here. So I love speaking about biodynamics. It's always interesting talking to a group I don't know really anyone and where they're at, and but I will try to paint a picture with not only descriptions but science and the challenges of biodynamics and the opportunities of biodynamics over the next hour. I was saying to Ryan, I don't know how everyone else's time is, but since we're kind of getting started late, I'm happy to go over a bit if people want to do that. And I also, of course, want to leave some time for questions. But as we go along, feel free to interject as well. Ryan, this may not work because of the glitches, but I had a PDF. I don't know. It's just more eye candy than anything. But if we could get that on screen, that would be nice. If not, no worries.
Yeah, for sure. I should be able to pull it up. Hang on just 1 second.
It is beautiful. I have it too. For Claire just like sent it to me this morning, so I can attest that it is lovely. And let me know if you want me to share my screen, Ryan.
All right, great.
Nice.
So yeah, just that's a painting by our dear friend Yumiko East, who lives in Japan these days, but she also has lived here in California. And she does wonderful veil painting, it's called, and it seems to capture the essence of things. So that's actually a valerian plant in flower. And my partner, Carin, is a designer, artist, and we thought that was a good choice to kind of match the title of this, Farming the Invisible, because what we see and what there actually is in totality are two quite different things. And that's where biodynamics really excels, is saying, hey, the manifest physical world is only a small part of what we can actually perceive, but we can learn ourselves to perceive that in an objective way and use that to harness nature's rhythms and powers and from the cosmos and the earth to create whole new science that actually is really, I'm going to make a bold statement, the only sustainable way to go forward. We can't ignore the cosmos and the earthly rhythms anymore. If we only look at the material, even the best organic methods will eventually run out of stuff. And we have to learn to manifest and harness the powers that are streaming down on the earth 24/7, 365 in subtle ways. And that in turn can nourish our gardens, the earth, ourselves, the animals, all the kingdoms. So with that, let's go to the next slide if you can. So yeah, just a quick background. Ryan already touched on a little bit, but Carin and I have had Blossoms Farm for about 15 years. Up until fairly recently, our main components were herbal products. We grow all the herbs and make skincare, tinctures, superfoods, all these things out of those resultant products. So it's a value-added kind of vertically integrated farm. And is everyone? Yeah, okay. I said for a second my screen froze. I wanted to make sure I wasn't losing people. So then last year we also took over a existing vegetable and strawberry farm in Moss Landing, which is about 15 minutes from us on the water. And so now we have that true farm organism where food is medicine, medicine is food. And it's kind of as if we didn't have enough going on. Now we have this whole 8 acres of vegetables and strawberries. But that's been a really cool aspect and given us new avenues to explore and work with. Our website, I'll just say it is blossomsfarm.com, and you can see all our various beautiful products there. So let's jump into what is biodynamic. So you can see this quote by the Austrian esotericist, scientist, philosopher, General polymath Rudolf Steiner gave the original lectures that gave rise to what is now called biodynamic farming. He gave those in 1924 in June, not too long before he passed away. So the world really was blessed to get those insights from Steiner. The story goes that he gave thousands of lectures and insights on pretty much everything that touches the human condition, but hadn't touched agriculture. And farmers started saying, hey, we are noticing a decline in our fertility of crops, animals, the quality of foods is going down, because this was already just at the beginning of chemical agriculture. And people were already noticing the decline. And finally, after almost pleading with Steiner, he said, okay, I can give a series of lectures and give insights on what could be done from a spiritual scientific perspective. And that's what gave rise to biodynamics. So as a little background, Steiner's philosophy is called anthroposophy. I don't know. See, this is where I don't know if anyone knows anything about that, but I'll just give a little quick description of that if possible. That basically behind this world of sense is another spirit world. So again, I already alluded to that earlier, where what we see with our physical eyes and our senses, there are processes and forces that are streaming down from, you could say, invisible, non-manifest areas. We could call that forces or beings, even intelligence, wisdom, and that these are actually consistent and forever, and that we as humans actually have the capacity to begin to recognize these and work with these if we develop certain capacities that are dormant within ourselves. So just as we don't know how to read when we're young and we have to be taught to read, we have to learn how to develop the capacities that can detect these subtle forces and processes that are streaming down and all around us constantly forever, but are subtle and you could say unmanifest. There's a saying in this that spirit is never without matter and matter is never without spirit. So the two are together. And you could say that the spirit or unmanifest world needs a physical carrier, a physical thing, for its forces and you could say it's entities to bring everything to life in this world. So our science of today is very good at parsing out, you could say, reductionist and death processes. So in high school or junior high, we can dissect a frog and look at the tiny little parts, and that's fine. We learn a lot from that. But what is a living frog? And that's a different type of science if you look at it as a holism. So it's a phenomenological science, studying the whole to determine its essence rather than dissecting something into ever smaller parts. So Steiner's science is really this phenomenological approach. And that's where it gets challenging because that's not what today's science wants to talk about. They only want to talk about what can be measured, weighed, and counted. And if you want to talk about other things, it's hard for science to go there. And I'm going to come back to that whole topic towards the end because I want to, when I hear, oh, biodynamics isn't really scientific, it's like I take umbrage to that and say what's not scientific is really today's science. And it's because Steiner always said, today's science is wonderful. It's given us all of what we have, but it's lacking the whole polarity side of it. And so he never said get rid of today's science. He was saying we have to add in a whole other side of science, and that's where the future lies. So it's not getting rid of science, it's adding to it. And again, that's where I say, hey, today's science is the one that's deficient, not biodynamics. And again, I'll come back to that. So this type of approach to farming is simply not, I'm going to add X amount of nitrogen to the land, whether it's organic or chemical. It's about how can I set up conditions on my farm so that the land can attract for itself what it needs. And that's kind of a very difficult concept for our Western minds, that somehow my soil, my plants can be with my consciousness, with my interventions, with using certain preparations and techniques, I can actually create land that attracts to itself what it needs. And that's why it's truly sustainable. I'm not importing even wonderful organic fertilizer from somewhere else. I'm generating from the farm, from within the farm itself, what it needs. And that's a huge thing. So this goes into the concept. One of the concepts of biodynamics is creating a farm organism, is sometimes the word used, or a farm individuality. In other words, just like every person is an individual and has an individual personality and look, so does each farm. And if we can develop this farm organism, we can create an organism that creates what it needs from within itself. It's more resilient to, let's say, climate stresses. It's not reliant upon outside sources. And it's much more healthy for the entire environment because there's diversity, there is climate mitigation, there's water retention, there's carbon being built in the soil. And all this is done through this farm individuality. And I can tell you that this is a huge topic that I think is just only beginning to be explored. I mean, it's one thing to plant a hedgerow, which is wonderful. But it's another thing also to begin saving your own seeds, which is also wonderful. So you create seeds of your own place. It's kind of land-raised seeds. But what about eating these foods and medicines from your land and from your region? Is that not a healthier thing than buying food from far away or taking medicines that coming from, maybe it's growing thousands of miles away? It's growing in your bioregion, creating this kind of not only your farm individuality, but it's increasing your individuality and your local resilience and independence and uniqueness. So that's all part of this aspect. So the farm individuality. Another thing that sets biodynamics apart from just traditional organic farming, and by the way, the precepts of organics really arose out of Steiner's lectures. I keep researching this, and there was I think Farmers of 40 Centuries was written in 1911. I forget the gentleman's name who wrote that, but he just documented kind of default organic practices in Asia. And of course, everything was organic prior to the chemical revolution, but there had never been an organized form or series of lectures given that created what today is called organic farming. And Steiner was really the first to do that. And again, what seems to have happened is about 10 years after Steiner gave the agriculture lectures, the biodynamic lectures, others such as the Rodale, Lord Northbourne, Sir Albert Howard, and Lady Eve Balfour all started writing books about the need for organic farming. And that's where modern organic farming arose, was from those people. But that was really in the 30s and 40s, years after Steiner gave these lectures. And what seems to have happened is those folks totally read Steiner's stuff and thought, wow, this is cool. It's all valid, but I'm going to leave out this kind of the strange stuff. Because there's the biodynamics, it's biological dynamics. So it looks like modern day organics is really the bio part. It's we talk about that today, the soil food web, the need for diversity of microorganisms, how this biological part. But the dynamic parts of biodynamics are still just a real challenge for people to kind of enter into. And that simply gets back to there's these forces streaming down. We know these things, like the moon has obviously a effect on tides, on water, has this pulling action, but we somehow are almost resistant to considering that that has an effect on our plants, our animals, the earth itself, and ourselves, even though this is ancient wisdom. And Steiner said, hey, we have to consider these things. So the modern day organics is wonderful. It's given rise to all sorts of wonderful science, but it's still lacking on the dynamic part. Other systems that have arisen really out of certain, if you trace it back, the roots are in biodynamics is permaculture. In fact, one of the founders of permaculture was very familiar with biodynamics. And then regenerative ag pulls much of its processes from biodynamics as well. So I feel like it's time for biodynamics to step up into the world and say, hey, it is a science. It's a different type of science. The time is now, because in some sense, as wonderful as organics are, as permaculture is, regenerative is going in the total right direction. We have to consider these other things to get to a truly sustainable regenerative future. And now I kind of get more and more like almost messy, kind of like a preacher. We got to start looking at biodynamics and not think it's such a weird thing. So I hope I can do a little bit of that today. I think one of the challenges, besides just the more occult or hidden nature of the science that Steiner brought, is that it requires a huge leap of faith and also practice of how do you actually develop these ideas, how do you work, and it takes a lot of inner work, and that's both the beauty of it but also the challenge of it. It's simply not a recipe that you can copy and just take and apply to your land. Although many practitioners have no idea of the science behind biodynamics, they do just follow the guidelines from, let's say, the certifying agency, which is Demeter, the international certifying body that certifies biodynamic farms is Demeter International. In the United States has Demeter USA, and it's a wonderful organization and actually starting to thrive after a few years of some challenges, but it's back, and it's more and more farms are starting to register to become Demeter certified. But so you can practice it without really understanding it, but I take this kind of passionate, like how can we understand it, understand the science behind it, and then really take it as an inner path. It's not just simply a farming technique. It's actually a path to self-development. And so those two things for me are key. Path to self-development. I'll leave it for others how I'm doing. I got a long way to go, I'm first to admit, but it's just a process, but also learning the science behind it. Because I do have a science background. I want to be able to talk to a scientist and say, hey, you may think it's strange, but this is where biodynamics is coming from. So those are two of my passions, along with just simply growing things. I just absolutely am passionate about growing things. So this really calls for us to be, Paracelsus is the 15th century Swiss alchemist scientist said, you know, for a healer, a true healer needs to be a philosopher, an astronomer, an alchemist, and a virtuous, have morals. That's a true healer. If we fast forward to today, you could say a true student of anthroposophy and then the science arising from that in biodynamics, you really need to understand the spiritual human being. You need to be an astrosophist, the wisdom of the stars. You need to understand some concepts from homeopathy, and you also have to have that moral foundation. Otherwise, no good could come from this. So, how's everyone doing? I'm just kind of going on. We good so far? Yeah. Okay. Again, feel free to jump in if I'm going too fast or whatever. Okay. Should we go to the next slide? So here I've already spoken about this a little bit. It's regenerative. Of course, it's holism. I talked about the farm individuality or farm organism. Oh yeah, so that's good to see these notes, because then another aspect of biodynamic farms is typically you have what's called an animal component. In other words, you have some kind of farm animals on it. And there's all sorts of conversations about this. In Europe, it's allowed to even have bees and earthworms as your farm component. That's because it is sometimes challenging to have a cow, for example, or even a goat or a sheep. But the idea of the animal component is several aspects. One is you're trying to get the manure from the animal. So you're feeding the animal ideally from the land, not buying all sorts of imported food. You're feeding it from the land. That manure in turn contains the forces and microbes of the land. You compost that and put it back on the land in this ever increasing lemniscate of fertility. So the animal eats from the land, the manure from the animal goes back on the land, everything keeps rising, fertility, the animal health, the vitality of the land, etc. That's one aspect. Another is more esoteric. An animal provides something that I think we all know, but we don't often talk about. There's a certain soul quality to an animal. So plants they're alive, but they don't have that kind of consciousness, you could say. But an animal has consciousness. So you're bringing, if you will, animal consciousness onto the land, which is actually a big deal. We have consciousness, we have self-consciousness even, which is why we're different from animals. But an animal is bringing these forces onto the land it's called astrality in Steiner's language, this kind of soul quality onto the land, so that you are increasing those forces, which in turn increase fertility and bring about a crop or a vitality of the land that can't, if you just took everything off the land, which is impossible, of course, you can't take everything, microbes and earthworms, but if there was no animal on the land whatsoever, there's a paucity of forces there. And so an animal can bring that connection, not only literally to astral forces, but to yourself, where you have this kind of healing presence of animals on the land. So we here at Blossoms, our farm, we have a couple cows. We have 7 goats now, 2 sheep, chickens, ducks, pigs. So, and they all have their particular qualities. And all that manure is composted and brought back onto the land so that it's increasing our fertility. Okay, what else? I mentioned the ethics. All kingdoms are respected. That's something that really, funny enough, organics doesn't generally have that as a consideration. Like I could get great fish emulsion fertilizer that's been harvested from the ocean, but it maybe depleted the ocean's reserves of fish. And organics really has very little to say about that. Regenerative, fortunately, does, and that's why it's going in such a good direction. But in biodynamics, it's explicit. You can't use stuff that's depleting the environment. You can't abuse people. You have to treat your employees with living wages. All that's all part of biodynamics as well. And then the preparations, and those are these 9 preparations that Rudolf Steiner gave indications for that are probably the heart of the challenging aspects of biodynamic. What are these alchemical medicines that Steiner gave?
Delmar, can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Yeah.
We just have before you move on to that, there's a question in the chat
Sure.
about animal piece. So Sharon asked, how do you view animal welfare, slaughter, and consumption of meat?
Our own conclusion, or at least living conclusion, is that when you have animals you choose consciously to have an animal on your land, there comes a time when you have to make difficult decisions. And we love our animals to death, but there are times we do have to butcher. Otherwise, it's not a sustainable practice for us. And I know of friends who are vegans who have an animal sanctuary, so I very much admire that. But even there, it's like, what can you eventually, we know how expensive it is to keep and feed an animal. How do you handle these questions? As far as, pros and cons of veganism or vegetarianism, I don't get into that. But our sense is animals' presence on the land. So there's in anthroposophy, the idea of the animal as a group, it belongs to a group soul. So we're individual souls, humans. That's why we have a self-awareness. An animal has more of a group consciousness. So it's always lots of tears when we decide we have to take an animal's life, and it's a reverential process. But we also take some solace in knowing that animal's just returning to its group soul, and it is providing not only nutrition for us, but it's provided nutrition for the land. It's had a good life. It's been joyful, but now it's time to go in our case. And that's only us. And that's why there's these questions. There's, what's allowed on the land? What's the minimal amount of animal quality can you have on a biodynamic farm? It's an ongoing discussion because we are certainly well aware of the challenges with this debate about butchering and veganism and all that. There's even vegan biodynamic preparations. So interesting question, understand it. But our conclusion is, so I'm not joking lightheartedly, but I say, wow, if I provided fertility for the land, I provided company and a presence for everyone, and then at the end I'm harvested, and my organs are used to make more medicines for the land, and the meat, hate to say this analogy, but is used to nourish, then I think that's a pretty good life. So it helps me understand the life of a cow in this case, because I haven't gotten to the preparations yet, but there are animal organs used to make those preparations. That's where I'm talking about this organs used. So if a cow's let's say a foot of cow intestines stuffed with dandelion flowers, I'll get into this in a bit, creates a compost amendment that helps provide fertility for literally thousands of cubic yards of compost. That's incredibly sustainable, an incredible gift from the animal to the land. So that all goes into this approach. And of course, CAFO farming and all this is just horrific, and there's no place for that in biodynamics. So I appreciate the question. I know how difficult it is. And let me, with that segue, talk about these preparations. So Steiner gave these 9 preparations that are at best, like, what the heck was he smoking? How could he come up with these things? And yet, when you really enter into that science, at least I see it, that it begins to make not only some sense, but it's what's really weird today is not biodynamics, it's the science we have today, which, CRISPR and GMO and chemicals and what have you. That's what's weird. This is all about synergies between kingdoms. That's what the preparations really are. They are meant to be. So we have this, our world is continually being divided, separated, um, specialized, etc. The preparations are actually are medicines that help to reunite everything again. Not to go back to some idealistic, Adam and Eve past, but it's an attempt to reunite kingdoms so that we are more aware of each other, we are more respectful of each other, and that knowing that these synergies between the different kingdoms, the mineral kingdom, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the human kingdom, are all connected. And if you can make medicines from those different kingdoms in a rhythmic timing way, you create these incredible, powerful, radiation-filled medicines that, when I say radiation, radiate over the land. It's not about substance. It's about increasing the forces on the land so that the land can attract to itself what it needs. That's really what these preparations are doing and how they can work at homeopathic doses. So a tablespoon of preparation 500, which is simply cow manure from a female cow put into a cow's horn and buried in around the fall equinox, and then about 2 feet deep, and then it's left over the winter there, and then you unearth that in the spring around the spring equinox. That resultant kind of humus preparation is enough in that one horn to increase fertility, earthworm activity, microbial activity, earthly forces, moon forces, reproductive forces on the land. In that one horn, probably you could say that's enough for 10 acres of land. Incredible. So again, but how does that work? I need X amount of nitrogen per acre, or how many pounds. But in this case, you're applying a process. You're enhancing a process by applying these radiation forces. And that's what a preparation is doing. I would point, let's see, maybe we could go ahead a second to the next slide. I'll come back to rhythm. Oh, yeah. So,
Delmar, can I ask a quick question or just
yeah.
a clarification? What do you mean when you say homeopathic doses?
So in the case of, for 1 acre of land, you would use about a tablespoon to 2 tablespoons of this transform manure, just as one in a bucket of water. So let me just go to that for a second. You get, let's say, a 5-gallon bucket. You fill it full of warm water, preferably either spring or rainwater. You don't want tap water that has chemicals in it. You take about like I said, let's say a tablespoon of this cow manure preparation. You just sprinkle that in the water, and you generally with your arm, or you could use a stick, you start and you stir that. And you start stirring and you create a vortex. And you get a good vortex going for, let's say, 5 or 10 seconds, and then you reverse that. And when you reverse that vortex, chaos happens. And you get it going the other direction. And you do that again for an hour. So it's really a community activity. I mean, I've done it many times by myself. It's a real commitment. It's a real meditation right there. I can tell you with my monkey mind, sitting there for an hour stirring a bucket of water is a real challenge. But I can tell you also that after about 20 minutes or half an hour, the time begins to, the quality of time changes. The quality of the water changes. And you get into a rhythm, literally, that is, it's like a whole different experience then. And then all of a sudden the hour is up just like that. And then that bucket of water is now, you could say, imprinted with the message, if you want to use this language, from the cow manure that's been specially prepared over the winter. And then that is spread out onto the land, in this case, 1 acre. and it's usually use like either a bundle of, let's say, leaves, or a paintbrush works, something to fling that water onto the land by hand over this acre. So if you can imagine, each drop that hits the ground is radiating out this, you could say, a message saying, there's a synergy between the cow, the earth, the human, that radiates this message onto the land, which is increasing the land's capacity to receive humus building forces. It's not receiving humus, but it's able to receive messages to build humus. Now, I know this may sound like lunacy right now, but this slide now we're on is called the trials that were done for 45 years. It was the DOC trials in Europe. There was 3 methods: conventional, well, actually 4. What do you call it? Control, a chemical trial with normal chemical practices, organic practices, and the biodynamic practices. And they finally printed this after 45 years. And the results, to me, that, like, I've been waiting for this for years, really definitively prove that biodynamics is not only effective, it's superior to all the other techniques. So, for example, nitrogen content of the soil. So in biodynamic practice, you're not applying nitrogen, you're applying compost so there's some indirect nitrogen, but you're applying these preparations. You're doing a few other processes that may increase nitrogen, but you're literally bringing in nothing from the outside. The soil that had the highest amount of nitrogen was the biodynamic one after 45 years. The second place was organics, but that had brought in literally tons and tons of nitrogen from outside. The chemical nitrogen was also good, except that you're bringing in chemical nitrogen forever. So it was, and by the way, organic and chemical were less overall nitrogen. And the control was, very depleted nitrogen, not surprisingly. So that's just one example. The other, which even the article said they can't explain it, the only system that actually increased something was the biodynamic system, and that was potassium. And no potassium had been applied other than the trace amounts that would have been in compost and the preparations. So they said, science cannot explain this right now. And meanwhile, the other ones had actually gotten down, even though they were applying potassium, whether it's organic or conventional. So that's just a little snippet of extremely rigid protocols for 45 years to see what would happen. And I would also say the first 5 years of the trial, biodynamics was not terrible, but it wasn't very good. It was no better or worse. It was just kind of like, well, I don't see anything special here. But after about 10 years, it started separating out. And that's also one of the challenges with biodynamics. Everyone wants an instant pill or something you apply and you see an instant result. Biodynamics takes its time, but then you see that it is actually regenerative and sustainable. So when we talk about these preparations, they are alchemical medicines that are difficult for our Western scientific brains to comprehend, but they clearly have an effect, and that's shown in the DOC trials. Another one I just put up there is chromatography. Now that picture's a little hard to tell what that means, but those are chromatographs are when you take the sap or the juice of, let's say, of a carrot, and you put it in silver chloride with filter paper, and it creates kind of almost like a snowflake picture. And those pictures are actually, people can be trained to objectively read them. So someone might untrained could just say, well, I don't see any difference. They all kind of, I like the one on the right or whatever. But people can actually be trained to objectively read those, and then they are let's say in an anonymous way, they're given samples, and they can objectively choose the highest quality chromatographs. And invariably, the biodynamic chromatographs come out as the highest quality. So it's a measurement of quality. A chromatograph is a measurement of quality. that it isn't necessarily picked up other ways. So if you say, oh, I measured the juice of the carrot and it had the same amount of vitamin A as the other ones, there's no difference between biodynamics and conventional, let's just say, as an example. But then you look at a chromatograph and it's like, whoa, there's a big difference. And what are these qualities showing us? Well, they're showing us it has more light in it. So there's something called, and I hate to use all these big terms, but biophotonic luminescence. That's the measurement of light photons from cell walls. So biodynamic produce has more light in it, like photons in it, than let's say a conventional or organic. So it's another qualitative measurement of what's going on. And I think that really gets to the heart of what the problem with today's science is. It doesn't really measure qualities of things per se. It's looking more at stuff, quantity in this case. So that's just a little research. Okay, how are we doing on I did want to check, since we started late and we're getting near 10, is everyone okay to stay on a bit longer? Yeah, anyone off? Okay. Well, we'll go another like 15 minutes, like 10, 15, I think is probably fair. Is that okay, Ryan?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. So let me just continue on this theme a bit about today's science. Today's science weighs things, counts things, and measures things, as I already kind of said. Weight, number, and measure, as Steiner called it. So, and again, Steiner said, that's great. That's awesome. Everything arose of our modern day science out of that process. But he said there's a problem. There's a problem with that because everything in the universe has a polarity to it. So if you're only weighing things, counting things, and measuring things, you're leaving out the polarities of weight, number, and measure. And you can't have a true science unless you begin to develop a science that includes those polarities as well. And there is the secret of biodynamics. He gave these indications of biodynamics to include the polarities of weight, number, and measure. So the polarity of weight, we could call it, what gives things weight is gravity. So the polarity of gravity really is an understanding of levity. And that's a hard one for science, levitational forces. And an old saying, but it's a great one, like Newton discovered gravity when an apple fell on his head, but he never asked the question, how did the apple get up into the tree in the first place? And that's a picture of levitational forces. And there are sciences that do work with levity. Quantum physics goes in that direction. What's it called? Projective geometry. So today's geometry is Euclidean geometry. That's from if I'm standing on the Earth looking out to the infinitely distant cosmos, that's how today's geometry is oriented, Euclidean. But some bright people said, hey, what if you did the reverse and you had a geometry that starts at the infinity and goes back to a point on Earth? That's one aspect of projective geometry. And that begins to give different pictures of it's like a mirror image, if you will, of Euclidean geometry. So it doesn't negate Euclidean geometry. In fact, it welcomes it, but he says you also have to look at it from the infinitely distant back to a point. And that contains ideas of levity. And this is way too complicated to really get into now. And I'm not saying I understand it, but the preparations themselves are basically, it's a levitational foundation to it. And that's why the preparations are so challenging for people to begin to understand. But that's just a little picture of levity. So the other polarities, so I said number, weight, number, and measure. So the number we can say is quantity, and I've mentioned that already. I mean, how many bushels of corn can I get from an acre of land? That's science. I got this amount of bushels. Steiner says the polarity of quantity is actually quality. So we get this amount of bushels, but what are the qualities of those bushels? And we just touched on this a minute ago with like the chromatographs, the light photon emission. Those are qualities. One area that biodynamics is highly successful and being accepted is in the wine industry because everyone, they want their good wine. And so, but it is an ancient craft and art. And so like I think Bordeaux is almost all biodynamic now, the Bordeaux region of France, because they want quality and they know biodynamics can give you quality. So that one's relatively easy for us to measure even now. I wish science itself would measure it more, but we have tools. There's drop, what's it called? Drop picture method. That's when a fluid hits a surface and a special camera takes a picture of it. It creates a pattern, it needs to say. But that you can learn to read that as well. Like the woman that's really promoted this, Jennifer Green of the Water Institute, she can diagnose people with diseases, including cancer, by just looking at the picture, the pattern the drop makes when it hits the surface. So measuring qualities is relatively easy. And of course, we have our best measuring tools, which are our taste buds, our nose, our ears. We know quality still. And that's the best, highest scientific apparatus right there. And that's also where biodynamics can excel, is with just simply tasting, smelling things. Okay, so then the last polarity is weight number, measure. So Steiner said, okay, we measure things and now we can measure into nanometers and just incredibly minute, tiny little things. He said that's fine, but we also have to get the polarity of measurement. And the analogy for me is like, it is music. So he says the polarity of measure is an understanding of rhythm, which is we've touched on that a bit. But if you think of music, we know that there's measures of music, and within those measures of music are the notes, which create not only the tones but also the rhythm. So that's just a long way of saying when you do something has an effect. In fact, Steiner went as far as saying when you do something is as important as what you do. And we've lost, the old Farmer's Almanac. We've kind of lost this ability to say, hey, I'm not going to plant or sow seeds on certain days because it's not favorable. We just tend to just be machines and do stuff, whatever. And we create hybrid seeds that are probably less affected by tides, by the moon, by where is Venus, where is Saturn. All these things are just too much of a bother to worry about. So who cares? And let's just do what we want to do when we want to do it and not worry about it. Steiner says that's a grave error, and we actually create way more work by ignoring that, and we also get way less quality. Here on our farm, Carin really works a lot with it. It's called the Biodynamic Stella Natura calendar that shows you there when times are favorable to do certain things in the garden, where the zodiac is, what constellation we're in, where the planets are, etc. And you can, by working with that calendar, Carin distills what are called hydrosols when you distill for essential oil. And we find that when we harvest on certain favorable times and distill them, we get a much better, more potent medicine hydrosol. And this goes for everything. It could be for food. If you want to make sauerkraut, would you see from a biodynamic perspective, you wouldn't want to chop cabbage, harvest and chop cabbage on a day when the moon is in the water sign and it's a full moon, because that's a picture of water, 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 water. Everything's water. And what would happen is you would have a fermentation that goes so fast that your sauerkraut turns to mush and you don't get the desired effect. You want a slower fermentation. So you would harvest when maybe there's a fire sign using old zodiacal terminology. So there's earth, water, air, fire. And these things are demonstrable. It's just proven beyond doubt, but we tend to ignore that. I mean, there's mysteries in the world, like the Chartres Cathedral outside of Paris has gold fused into its stained glass. No one still knows how to do that again. And the theory is they understood something we don't, and that was something to do with when they did that work, that to get gold embedded into glass, actually in it, they understood rhythm. So it's an ancient science. It was lost. We still have remnants of it about the full moon, etc. But Steiner says we have to bring that back in a new way with modern consciousness, modern science. And if we do that, we have tremendous effects and positive effects from that. One simple one is when two planets are in what's called opposition. Again, this is astrological terminology, but if the Earth is in the middle and there's one planet on one side and one planet on the other side, almost in a straight line, that's called an opposition. The effects of the preparations and any work you do on the land is much better than when those planets are not in opposition. So it's basically it's like a reflection. It's a concentration of forces onto the Earth that are aids in our planting, our harvesting, our sowing, etc. And it's a huge science. It's complicated. Fortunately, as I said, this Stella Natura calendar, which is what we use in this country typically, is a great aid. You don't have to know all this. You can just look at the calendar and learn how to read it and then say, hey, I think I want to sow seeds on a couple of days before the full moon because that's a really prime time to sow seeds. And it very much helps us. Okay, I want to make sure I leave time for everything else. Gotta look at my notes a second. Yeah, as I said, so yeah, oh wow, okay. So I wanted to leave some time for comments and questions. So if we're only going to 10, 15, we have 9 minutes left. Happy to keep going. Let's go to the next slide. I think there's maybe another 1 or 2 slides, or maybe there's not. I'm not sure. Oh yeah. Okay, yeah. So I touched on all this. It's kind of beautiful. So the alchemical medicines for the earth. So when you think of synergy, so let me just quickly, if I can, talk about a cow horn. Why would Steiner choose a cow horn, and why would stick cow manure in a cow horn to get a fertilizer or a alchemical medicine for the earth? Cow horn is made up of chitin. It's extremely dense. It's said that radiation can't even escape a cow horn. A cow itself is an incredible being of digestion. The 4 stomachs. It's this ruminant. There's no better representation of digestion on the planet than a ruminant, and in this case, a cow. And what is the soil? The soil is all about digesting organic matter and mineral components to create humus and clay. So a cow is kind of a living picture of a soil potential. So a cow horn has this incredible dense structure, and a cow horn, if you look inside of it, it's actually connected to a cow's digestive system. There are, you could say, channels that go into the sinuses, which in turn go into the digestion. And so a cow's horn actually is very active in a cow's digestion. That's one reason biodynamic farmers don't cut off or burn off baby cow horns. You let them form because it's essential for the cow, really. And it makes them. We notice our cows are much more alert than a typical cow because, again, it's connected to the universe. Anyway, so a cow horn is this incredible dense structure that's hollow once you take it off. And so Steiner said, well, if you take manure from the backside of the cow, that's from this incredible organ of digestion that poops out this supreme manure that's full of microorganisms and forces that the cow's been ruminating on all time, and it's from a female cow that is all about fertility because it's a milk and a calf, etc. That's the symbiotic relationship that creates a medicine for the land. So you take this manure, you stuff it in the horn, and then you bury that, as I mentioned earlier, into the earth, which is actually a living organism in and of itself. And it's breathing in very intensely in the wintertime. You could say as a picture, we exhale and inhale. The day gets inhales and exhales, and the year inhales and exhales. So you're taking these forces that are coming from the cosmos into the earth, concentrating those into this cow horn, and there's this alchemical process going on between the manure transforming within the cow horn, but it can't, you could say, can't escape. It doesn't lose its forces because the cow horn is so dense. It kind of basically, it goes up. You can imagine a force going up into the cow horn from the manure, and it can't escape. It goes back down. It goes back up. It goes back down. It goes back up, and it does this all the way along. Meanwhile, in concert with the earth, doing the same kind of process where the earth is inhaling and exhaling. So it's getting earthly forces and forces from the manure. And what this creates is this, it's not humus, it's not compost, it's not earthworm castings, it's something that's kind of it's like a picture of humus that is potential. It's all potential. Like it just can't wait to get out of there and radiate out its forces, because it's been, you could say, alchemically radiating all winter, but it couldn't escape. And then when you take that and imprint it onto the water, the idea of it, then that's flowed out into the land, and that you can imagine this incredible force that goes out onto the land. And that's what's promoting this development of humus, of carbon sequestration, of nitrogen. We talked about how biodynamic farm is the only one that had more nitrogen at the end, that with no application of nitrogen. That is a little picture of the preparation. So, and all this relates to the planetary influences, to the different kingdoms of nature. And what you're trying to do is to get this humus and clay marriage, which, to put it that way, which is the true secret to fertility forever and ever without having to steal from somewhere else. So I think with that, let's take a couple minutes if there's a few questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Delmar. I appreciate it. Yeah, and people can just come off mute or pop something in the chat if you have questions.
Just a comment. Thank you very much for sharing, Delmar. It's interesting. It's a lot to take in, not knowing anything, much about it, and also preparing next week to go to the Hudson Valley and the biodynamic farm there. For someone who's interested in food systems overall and helping kind of on a macro scale move to a more regenerative, organic, healthy farming system, what would you say would be maybe the top 3 practices from biodynamics that are important to incorporate, into the broader system, if not everyone can kind of embrace or understand the whole thing?
Right. So again, I think anything you look at organic, regular, traditional organics, I would start there, cover cropping, not using chemicals, etc. So that's kind of a given. From biodynamics specifically, using the preparations in compost pile. So these, I couldn't get into everything, but there's some that are put into the compost and some that are applied to the land. These, I think, are, again, from the doc trials in Europe, these are the magic that is yet to be fully realized by everyone, that really can do something. And it is a commitment. It's not so bad with the compost, because you just insert, when you make a compost pile, you insert 6 of the preparations right then, and it's fun. And but then applying the preparations to the land can be, it's hard to fit it into our daily routine, or it doesn't have to be daily. You only have to do it once or twice a year. But if you do that, you're actually creating far less work for yourself over time, because you're allowing those preparations to do the work for you, rather than you always having to apply X amount of fertilizers here and there. So that would be the one. Also related, but secondarily, is just paying attention to rhythm. Sowing seeds on if you don't know anything else, sowing a couple days before the full moon is preferable. That's like old wisdom. But if you do it kind of on an eclipse or near the new moon, you're going to have less success. So the moon's all about water and pulling. So if you get the seed gets excited, like you sow it a couple of days and the moon just has this pulling force that's really quite remarkable. And there's the soil is wet and the seed is wet. That pulling, you can almost say, encourages the seed to germinate more quickly. So paying attention to the rhythm as well. Preps and rhythm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Helpful.
I wonder if I could ask one.
Yeah.
You spoke about the Stella Natura calendar that your
Yeah.
wife has been maintaining and you've been using. Is that in the public domain? Is that something we can access, or is that available?
Yeah. I think if you just, I hate to say it, but just Google, it should come up. Or I could, let's see if I can do that. Yes, Spikenard Honeybee Sanctuary. It's a honeybee education center in Virginia. SPIKE, Spikenard, NARD, one word, Spikenard. So Alex Tukman is the director of that, but he also is taking over the production of the calendar. So first of all, it's just a great place. It's a biodynamic bee sanctuary. Everyone else is losing bees around the world. Their bees are multiplying, again, using biodynamic practices. So you can not only check them out, but they would have the calendar available.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Great.
Can I ask one more?
Yeah, please.
You spoke about applying in homeopathic quantities, and I have just now this year started spraying my compost teas, comfrey teas, foliar fertilizers with a drill pump and a hose, and just dousing everything with tons of compost tea, foliar feed of any bioactive stuff I can get my hands on. Is there a downside to over applying?
Yeah, everything's about balance. So I don't know, your situation might be perfect for you. There is the danger of so that kind of thing, you could say, is a fertility for too much water forces, possibly, which could lead to more diseases and pests, possibly. But if you're like we have this real sandy soil and not a lot of nutrition, so we need to constantly apply. So it would totally depend on your situation, what the weather is, what your soil type is, etc. But there is that danger of just overdoing a good thing. But that's where you develop another aspect we didn't talk a whole lot about, but you're observing and pay attention. We always say pay attention. Look, and if you've seen, let's say, aphids and big leafy growth and not much fruit, you're probably overdoing it. If everything seems in balance, it sounds like you might be doing the right thing. So develop there's that old saying, the best fertilizer is the farmer's shadow. In other words, looking, observing and watching and seeing, and then you'll know eventually. But yeah.
Good deal.
Cool. Thanks, guys. In a small but sweet group.
Yeah, thank you so much, Delmar. I want to just mention one thing that comes up for me when you talk about homeopathic quantities. Have you, Delmar, heard this term quorum sensing?
I've heard it. I could not explain it to you. So
I could take a stab at it. So it's come up in some soil workshops that I've been to, actually at Piscinus Ranch. There's soil scientists that are now studying and seeing this concept of quorum sensing, which is basically the idea that different organisms, microbes in the soil in particular, will go dormant when conditions are not favorable, but they don't die, they go dormant. And then once there is a sense that there is a quorum or a quantity of living microbes of the same type or of a complementary type, they'll wake up because it's a signal that conditions might be favorable for them to now become active. And so I heard this in a organic but more traditional or more broadly accepted farming context than biodynamics. And to me, it seemed like kind of an explanation for why these homeopathic quantities might work, in that you're not applying a massive amount where on their own they would, in our view, make an impact, but they're sending a signal, and you talked about this, but they're sending a signal to the land that conditions are now favorable for this sort of activation. So I found it just a really, it's one of these things that, practices that have worked for ages, but we've kind of dismissed because we don't understand why. I feel like the more we observe, the more we do get signals or explanations of, oh, this is why this is working. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, like a catalyst.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Can I ask one more?
Yeah.
You spoke about turning for a vortex for 5 to 10 seconds in a, I believe, 5-gallon plastic bucket. I was thinking about casting a concrete bowl that was large enough to stir for a vortex in one direction and then a vortex in the other direction. It seemed like the plastic bucket is kind of an inorganic shape, kind of an artificial structure. And if I was able to cast my own sort of a vessel for that it might be a different way to do that.
No, it's beautiful. Yeah, there's a lot of thought about that, and a lot of opinions about that, and everyone agrees with you that some kind of what do you call it, amphora, is that the term?
Yeah.
Just that kind of shape is great for stirring the preparations. I know people that use copper, so making a copper vessel, but also terracotta. So yeah, I agreed. Just remember, you have to empty it out somehow. So if you have concrete, if you have a drain at the bottom or something like that, would be
drain plug.
Yeah. So yeah, that'd be cool. You can also use a device. I mean, we have it's called a Chester vortex organizer. It's based on a 7-sided form that was discovered about 25 years ago by Frank Chester. It's chestahedron. It turns out our left ventricle of our human heart is a 7-sided form. No one had ever discovered this form, but using indications from Rudolf Steiner, Frank Chester discovered it. And then he started saying what kind of practical applications are there. And one was stirring the preparations with this form to create this vortex. And so you can use a tool as well, but generally at our scale, if it's small enough, it's just great with a stick or your hand or arm, but the shape is important too. Great. Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Delmar. Like I said, I tried to say in the beginning, I don't know if that was my most eloquent introduction, but I really appreciate you taking on the parts of biodynamics that I think are more challenging in a head-on way and not avoiding them. And I'm always enlightened by the amount of research and science that's actually out there, but not as mainstream. So really cool to have you. And for those of you joining the Hudson Valley course, you don't need to retain all this information, but I think it's really great to have a little bit of a jumping off point before you get to Hawthorne Valley, and then we'll speak to Spencer as well about his take on all of it. And I think it's really nice to have a couple of perspectives from some really knowledgeable farmers.
I can assure you, everyone in biodynamics has different takes, and that's part of the beauty of it as well. So it's great. But thanks. Hawthorne Valley is awesome, and wish I could be there myself. Anyway,
someday we'll bring you. Delmar.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, cool. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Appreciate
Thanks, Ryan.
it.
Okay.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.